Hello class, my name is Gabriel COF. So first I want to ask, who here is a meat lover? Who here is vegetarian or vegan? Who here thinks vegans are absolutely crazy? In today's time we have seen a rise in vegetarian and vegan lifestyles. I myself though have come to adopt a vegetarian lifestyle. Now before I begin, I just want to add that I recently changed my original lifestyle and do not despise you meat eaters. Just until recently, you would catch me at your local In-N-Out having at minimum a 4x4 with animal fries. It made you feel pretty good, didn't it? So I wanted to bring up today, though, that many believe that that is, somewhat of how our diet is on the daily, and that we usually will have a burger and fries as our typical lunch or somewhat. So my claim of fact today, though, is that a vegetarian lifestyle has substantial benefits for Americans. We are going to discuss how vegetarian diets promote an increase in physical health, that being vegetarian reduces the negative impact on the environment, and that being vegetarian is the most practical diet for today's average lifestyle. As I stated, vegetarian diets promote an increase in physical health. Firstly, it reduces the risk of many health problems such as heart disease. According to Harvard Health, compared with meat eaters, vegetarians tend to consume less saturated fat and cholesterol and more vitamin C, E, dietary fiber, folic acid, potassium, magnesium, and phytochemicals, which in turn reduce cholesterol, lower blood pressure, and lower body mass index, all of which, if you have the reverse effect of that, you reduce your chronic illnesses. These chronic illnesses, though, include heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, which are all relevant in America. According to World Health Organization's ranking in the World Health Systems, USA today is ranked 37 out of 50 in overall health, where much of this ranking is attributed to typical diets for Americans. To combat these chronic illnesses that we face in America, we must increase our recommended daily intake of crucial nutrients and minerals, which leads to my next point. Being vegetarian substantially increases the recommended daily intake of vitamins and minerals. According to dietary guidelines of 2015 to 2020, about 3/4 of our population has an eating pattern that is low in vegetables, fruits, and oils, and more than half the population is meeting or exceeding total grain and total protein food recommendations. Also, most Americans exceed the recommendations for added sugars, saturated fats, and sodium. Therefore, this imbalance in our diet needs to change, and vegetarian lifestyles promote that positive change. And so next now, being vegetarian reduces the negative impact on the environment. Firstly, this lifestyle increases the demand for harmful fishing practices. According to the article Slow Fish, destructive fishing practices include bottom trawling, bycatch, and the use of poison and explosives. So one of the most harmful fishing practices are drift net fishing and bottom trawling, which basically has a huge, heavy net that does not degrade. It's very resistant to degrading underwater, and it destroys coral reefs left and right, as well as bycatching a lot of species that are not even in our food chain, such as turtles, sharks, whales, and predominantly it catches more bycatch than it does of our actual food. In addition, being vegetarian reduces harmful farming practices. As I would like to mention in the article Meat Science, meat undergoes major chemical changes during processing and commercialization. So factory farming, for example, the way we process meat is by grinding, cooking, storage, exposure to light. And so what happens is these meats go through chemical processes which create toxic compounds such as sodium nitrate, which is found in about 10 to 20% of meat. But more so, most of this meat is contaminated with other chemical compounds. So, as I mentioned, with factory farming, meat processing is very unhealthy for consumers and animals because of harmful chemicals that get added to the meat due to processing, as well as the quality of life for factory farm animals is significantly less than free-range animals. So according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, factory farms actually raise 99.9% of chickens, 97% of laying hens, and 99% of turkeys, and 78% of cattle sold all across supermarkets in the U.S. So it is most likely that you are also eating this meat that is contaminated with toxic chemicals. So now, as another point is that vegetarian actually helps reduce the demand for deforestation due to less land being used for agriculture. So according to Laura Kehoe, she has a PhD in wildlife conservation and in land use from Humboldt University of Berlin. She states that if we all woke up vegan or vegetarian in 2050, we would require less cropland than we did in the year 2000. This would allow us to reforest an area around the size of the entire Amazon rainforest. Somehow fitting though, considering that 70 to 80% of deforestation in the Amazon is due to livestock industry. We deforest an area the size of Panama every single year, and it's mind-blowing to see how much we use for livestock and for grain production to feed livestock as well. So now finally, being vegetarian is the most practical diet for today's average lifestyle. One support to this is that it provides a more balanced diet for most American lifestyles. So according to CDC News, 80% of Americans do not get the recommended exercise weekly. And because of that, our lifestyle, like I said, by dietary guidelines, we have more meat and grain than we do with vegetables and fruits. And so because of that, we have too much protein intake. So the typical protein that we should be having is 54 grams of protein a day for a 154-pound person. But we exceed those numbers just in having a 4x4 at In-N-Out or having a steak dinner. So now, in conclusion, my claim is that a vegetarian lifestyle has substantial benefits for Americans. I've supported this claim with how vegetarian lifestyles promote an increase in physical health, reduce the impact on the environment, and provide a more practical diet for today's average lifestyle. Thank you.
All right, well, the proposition's clear. There's a preview of what the supporting contents are going to be, but when we get to the body of the speech, I don't have 3 supporting points. I end up with at least 5 and maybe 6 supporting points. So I think either you are over-labeling some of your supporting points or you haven't grouped them clearly enough with one another so that we can tell when one idea is connected to the other. That's a little bit problematic because I wrote down at least 5 supporting points, and like I said, I think there might have been a 6th one as well. So that's a little bit confusing. Even at the end of the speech, when you come back and you remind me what the 3 points are, I said, okay, then where does that fit? Where does that fit? And where does that fit? I think it's part of your other argument, and you gave them separate numerical signposts in the body of the speech. So it's strange because it's inconsistent with the introduction and the conclusion of the speech. The body of the speech doesn't reflect those things, and it's supposed to do that. So that's a bit problematic. There's good information in the presentation in several places. You've got data that talks about how meat consumption is related to a variety of diseases, although that's a little generic on that first piece of that first argument. The degree of threat and how much, for example, at the very end you talk about what our, we're supposed to have 54 grams of protein a day, and we're exceeding that by simply having a 4x4 or a steak dinner. I don't know that people eat a 4x4 or a steak dinner every day. That seems to be a big presupposition that's being presented here. And I think you had some other information that suggested that we have lots of dietary issues. The USA, for instance, information about us being 37th out of 50 countries in terms of health. I'm not sure how that's related to the consumption of meat. It might very well be, but there are plenty of products out there that are probably fattening and bad for us that don't necessarily involve meat consumption, says the guy drinking the alternative to those things. Got lots of sugar and that kind of thing going on. So I think there's a legitimate argument to be made here, but it's very generic at this point and a little bit thin on that first point. The issue about the ease of the vitamins, that seems to me like it's supposed to be part of the first point, and you've got it labeled as the second point. That was the first place that I got confused about what the structure was. I do think you've got some good information about how we lack the access to the vitamins that we're supposed to have, that we're not consuming as much. There was a piece of information, though, that was talking about how 80% of Americans don't get the exercise that they need, and how is that related to consuming meat? There's not really an explanation of that. So there's data in the presentation that doesn't always lead to the conclusions that you're talking about, and the conclusions are pretty they're stated in a very strong way, but the proof on them, I think, is maybe not quite as strong. I think you do a very nice job speaking to the audience and portraying yourself both. Like I said, I think your credibility issue is helped by the way you speak to us, but it's undermined a little bit by some of the inconsistencies on the data that you've got in the organizational issue. Let's see. Oh, well, like I said, there's some presuppositions about how much meat we consume. You talk about the 54 grams a day and that example that you talked about the 4x4, the steak. And going, well, is that what people consume? It seems like that would be an easy thing to establish given the way you've done your research. So that should go together a little bit more effectively. It's just, there's an argument here that just needs to be tightened up and the connections made with some stronger information. All right, I'm going to stop there.